Are you unsure of the differences between Republican and Democratic parties? Or maybe you're even considering not voting because you just don't know enough. In this video, I'm going to share with you the 3 key differences in Republican versus Democrats. Hey friends, welcome to Adulting with Esther, the show where we talk about the things that you don't learn in school. I'm Esther, and today we're going to be talking about the 3 key differences in Republican versus Democrat. We'll be talking about the history of how they got their names, we'll be talking about the role of government that they each believe in, and then we'll talk about what I believe to be the 7 most controversial issues for each different side. If you're new here, welcome. Consider subscribing down below. Feel free to check out the description down below at any point during this video where you'll be able to find things like show notes, video links, resources, and other materials referenced during this video. And make sure you stick around to the end because I'll give you some bonus insights on where Republicans and Democrats actually agree. But without further ado, let's get started. The history of the 2 parties in our bipartisan system can be a little bit confusing for some people. The first party was the Democratic Party. It was founded with James Madison and all those other old guys in the 1700s when they signed the Declaration of Independence, and we, America, seceded from Britain. The Republicans came around shortly after in the 1800s, 1854 to be precise. Their stance was anti-slavery, and their leader was Abraham Lincoln. Are you confused yet? Under Lincoln's rule, they banned slavery in 1865. But then, about 50 years later in 1912, the ideological beliefs for the 2 parties started to shift. The Democrats became far left, and the Republicans became far right, liberal and conservative. And while there's been a bunch of different names that have accompanied both parties, what we refer to them now are the Republican Party or the GOP, which stands for Grand Old Party. Their color is red, and they're represented by an elephant. What pushed the Democrats really far to the left was Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s after the Great Depression, which was the government trying to help out all the Americans so that they could reestablish economic stability, get businesses back in place, and ultimately help people survive. This enabled the government to take a much more hands-on approach to citizens and Americans in society so that they could hopefully establish a more equitable system amongst all of America's citizens. The color of the Democratic Party is blue, and they're represented by a donkey. Before we go any further, it's important that we address this massive spectrum that our bipartisan party has created here in America. On the far left, we have the Democrats, and on the far right, we have the Republicans, liberal and conservative. In the middle, there's a range of other parties that exist that stand on the line on different stances. Because this is a spectrum, the issues I'll be addressing today are generalizations, and they are fairly extreme. Each individual and politician who claims Republican might not be extremely conservative on every stance. Some of their stances may be closer to neutral or even cross over the line into the liberal side, and the same goes for Democrats. The purpose of this video is for you to be able to understand what the extreme differences are so that you can be better informed and ultimately decide where you lie on this spectrum. Unsure of where you might fall on this spectrum? Check the description below. There's a quiz you can take that'll help you focus out on your values and figure out where you lie. Arguably, the largest difference between Republicans and Democrats is their beliefs towards the role of government. Democrats prefer a large and active government with the goals of improving equality, equity, and overall lives of all of its citizens. Republicans believe that excessive government can be a bit of a waste of time, funds, and somewhat of a hindrance. This is due to the strong beliefs that in a free market economy, the strong will survive and regulate itself. But this can be confusing to understand, so let me give you an example. Think of the publicly available Easter egg hunts that supermarkets and other organizations do. There's typically 2 types of Easter egg hunts. You've got the one kind where they break it up into age groups. Each group has a different level of how hard the eggs are hidden. For the preschool group, the eggs are fairly wide open and they even allow parents to join them. Then there's the other kind of Easter egg hunts. Everyone comes in, the rules are given, and it's a free-for-all for all parties involved, and whoever gets the most, and whoever is left with nothing gets nothing. The first Easter egg hunt is a better representation of how Democrats believe the role of government should be used. A more heavy-handed approach in which they put lots of rules and regulations in place to establish a more equal policy for all. The second Easter egg hunt more strongly represents the Republican belief as a role of government. There's less regulation, it is a free market, and the strong will survive. Still confused? Think of the Republican Party as supporting a pro-business platform, meaning everyone will get the opportunity, but the strong will survive with no supports from the government. There's also more of a lean towards individual freedoms and rights, but we'll talk about that later. Meanwhile, Democrats attach a greater responsibility to equality amongst its citizens and social and community importance. Still with me? Question of the day: do you vote for one of the bipartisan parties, or do you range in the independent area in the middle? Let me know down in the comments below. And hey, if you're getting value out of this video so far, smash that like button. Okay, last part. Controversial issues between Democrats and Republicans. We're going to be covering 7 of them. Remember our disclaimer, these are extremes and generalizations of both sides. Just because a person claims Republican does not mean that they will be far right on all of their issues. They may vary across the spectrum. And don't forget to stick around to the end, where I'll share with you the 2 issues that Republicans and Democrats actually have similar views on. Military. Generally, Republicans support the idea of putting more spending toward our military, which leads to the idea that deployment is typically a good option in order to keep America in a stance of power with other countries. Democrats, on the other hand, are proponents of putting less money towards the military and tend to be slightly more reluctant to use force when dealing with international issues. Fun fact, when I dove deeper into this, it seemed so much that it wasn't so much a Republican stance versus Democratic stance, but a generational issue. 62% of adults over 50 are in support of putting more funds toward the military. Meanwhile, only 30% of adults under 50 and of voting age are in support of putting money towards the military. Gun control. Remember when I said that Republicans are in a stronger support of individual freedoms and liberties? Well, that comes into play here. Republicans believe in less gun control. Republicans strongly support the idea of being able to carry and conceal. For example, in the state of Alaska, when you turn 16 years old, you will get a driver's license. Assuming you have this driver's license, you are allowed to purchase and carry a firearm, as well as conceal it, meaning others around you will not see your gun and will not know that you have it. This strongly aligns with our second constitutional amendment, which is the right to bear arms. And Republicans strongly support keeping that Second Amendment as a part of their innate rights and freedoms. Meanwhile, Democrats still believe that guns are something that should exist, but they also encourage the idea of gun control laws. One of the gun control laws that Democrats would like to put in place is the inability to carry and conceal within a public place. Touchy topic number 3. Abortion. Remember, all of this is on a spectrum, and these are extreme generalizations. Democrats are in support of elective abortion, meaning if you want it, you can get it. Meanwhile, the Republican views differ pretty strongly. The extreme conservative view is that abortion should not be legal. And on the topic of reproduction, some Republicans also oppose the contraceptive mandate. This mandate requires employers who pay health insurance for their employees to cover birth control and other contraceptive methods for their employees. This is getting juicy. Number 4, LGBTQ. We all know it's legal for same-sex marriages to happen in the United States, but that doesn't mean that there's not some extremist opinions about what else can happen under that umbrella. The extremist Republican view is that there should be no gay marriage. Again, extreme guys, come on, bear with me. Republicans also oppose the idea of adoption for same-sex couples. And remember earlier when I talked about equality, that's a Democratic perspective. Essentially, rights should be equal for all, regardless of your gender or sexuality. Democrats also want to take it a step further by using the government to enact laws for small businesses and ban them from making laws that say, if you're gay, you can't come in our business. See, this connects back to that earlier stuff where Democrats want more government regulation. Next up, taxes. The extremist Democrat perspective on taxes is that it should be scaled. That if you make less money annually, you should pay lower taxes. Conversely, if you're in a higher tax bracket, Democrats believe that you should pay higher taxes. Democrats, on the other hand, believe that tax rates should be the same for all regardless of their income bracket. In fact, Republicans believe that the taxes should be lowered. And that takes it back to our second point. Republicans support smaller government involvement. If there's less individuals working for the government, then we don't need more taxes to pay those government officials. Well then, how about minimum wage? Great question. Democrats believe that minimum wage should be raised higher, and that goes back to their support of social equality and justice for all individuals. Higher minimum wage makes the workers have a better level of life. The extremist Republican view, on the other hand, is to not raise minimum wage, but that's due to their support of the idea that businesses might be struggled and placed under hardship if they have to pay their employees a higher wage. The last difference we'll talk about are civil rights initiatives. The Republican Party is very strongly in support of the idea that voters must have an ID in order to be able to vote. Democrats believe this is a social justice and civil rights issue because many American citizens of minority descent might not be able to obtain a photo ID for various reasons. Republicans are concerned that if voters don't have IDs, there might be some collusion behind the scenes that leads to inaccurate voting. Furthermore, the Black Lives Matter movement and organization is largely supported by Democrats, which again goes back to that original idea that Democrats are in support of social justice and equality for all Americans. Phew, that was stressful. I think I got a little sweaty on that one. So I've been promising you this whole video that if you stuck around to the end, I'd share with you a few of the issues that Democrats and Republicans actually kind of agree on. The first is foreign policy. And no, I'm not saying that they align on all issues, but take a look at this graph. When it comes to the ideas of limiting powers in other countries, Democrats and Republicans agree. We need to limit the powers of Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Where they differ is in their priorities. Democrats believe that Russia should be more of a priority, and Democrats are for Iran. But they do agree on the idea that China should be somewhat at the bottom. The two parties have also been relatively aligned on the ideas of who should be an ally. These three allies have been relatively consistent: Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. Where we're actually seeing the big differing opinions in foreign policy goals is the difference between young American views and older American views. But how about the idea of helping refugees? When it comes to that, neither side is in major support of it. Only 11% of Republicans are in support of aiding refugees from other countries, whereas only 39% of Democrats are in support of it. Neither is over half. The two parties also somewhat align on the ideas of deporting undocumented immigrants. Remember Barack Obama? More undocumented immigrants were deported under his administration than any president before, and this deportation has actually increased even more under President Trump. Lastly, the death penalty. As far as the death penalty goes, over the last 16 years, the trend has been down for both parties. The Republicans have dropped 10% in support of the death penalty, while Democrats have dropped 36%. The percentage is different, but the trend is the same. And since 2016, we've actually seen a slight uptick in both parties, about 2% for Democrats and about 4% for Republicans. What I find most interesting about the death penalty is that Republicans are in support of lessening government regulation, and therefore want less government spending. However, the death penalty is extremely more expensive than life in prison. And here's why. Remember, all this information I'm referencing is down in the description if you want to check it out yourself. Back in 2011, the drug that was used for lethal injections on average only cost about $84. However, it's a foreign import, and since then it's no longer been manufactured and is harder to get. This lethal injection used for the death penalty now costs on average $16,000. But that's not even the tip of the iceberg as to why the death penalty is so expensive. Which, by the way, on average, a death row inmate costs $1.12 million more than a regular inmate. And that's because these inmates are typically incarcerated for 20 years. That's a lot of food and maintenance. Actually, it's $56,000 a year for an inmate just for staffing. The criminals who receive the death row penalty also typically have more psychological issues, so there's more mental health care while in the prison system. These inmates, because they're in the prison system for so long, end up needing more health care because, well, they're old. So that's another cost. But before any of this even starts, the legalities and the procedures and the attorneys that all come together to assign the death penalty, they cost more because you're dealing with a person's life. I mean, that's a lot of money. In fact, in July 2018, there were 2,738 inmates on death row. That's almost $3 billion in additional expenses than if they had all been sentenced to life in prison instead. Crazy, right? After hearing all of this, are you wondering where you lie on this massive spectrum of policies, beliefs, and ideologies? Go ahead and take the quiz in the description down below and see where you lie. Did I forget something? Let me know down in the comments. All right, you made it to the end. Congratulations! I want you to brag about how awesome you are by typing this secret code word down in the comments to let me know you made it this far. Today we talked about Republicans versus Democrats, and we talked about the three key issues of how their history was formed, their roles of government, as well as many controversial issues that each political party stands on. If you got value out of this video, hit that like button, or click it, or smash it, whatever works for you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the alarm next to it so that you're alerted when we post our next videos. I had a great time making this video for you today. And as you go out into the world and deal with all those haters out there, remember, you are enough. And the world is lucky to have you just the way you are. See you in the next video.